Yeah, as Jim said, my background is as a regulatory lawyer. So before I was an academic, I represented energy companies in Washington and then again, and also in New York State for a long time. And then since I've gotten to McCombs, I've been teaching energy regulation courses. For about the last 10 years or so, we've had an energy regulation course as part of the MBA curriculum at McCombs. And now I'm involved in the new Energy Management and Innovation Center. And my task today is to talk to you about the kinds of things we're doing, primarily in the MBA program at McCombs, that relate to energy. Most of it's under the auspices of our new center. I should mention that I'm one of several co-directors, and we have an overall director, Sheridan Tittman, who's from the finance department. And I understand it's Energy Morning here at your conference. The next speaker will also be talking about energy. Britt Friend will talk about energy from an engineer's point of view. So that's good. It's a hot topic, and I guess this conference is about hot topics. Energy, since I've been at McCombs, I can't recall a time when energy was a hotter topic among the students. I got involved in energy regulation, energy policy, the last time it was about this hot, which was a long time ago. Some of you in the room may remember the late 70s and the energy crises of the 70s and the Carter administration energy package and all of that sort of thing. That's when I got involved in energy regulation. And it seems to me that a lot of the sort of motivating concerns that are driving all of the popularity of energy now were the same ones that we saw back then. They've changed, they've evolved, but it's deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra once said. Student interest in energy as a topic, is driven in part by what we see in the news. There's never a shortage of energy stories in the news. Since I've been at McCombs, we've seen surges of interest in energy around energy finance at the time that Enron was hot, and we created one of the first and best energy finance programs. The previous speaker was talking about derivatives, and we have people in our program who are really at the top of that field in terms of valuing energy derivatives and derivative strategy. And mostly when we first got involved in energy, that's when I was called upon to develop my energy regulation course to essentially complement that program. And a lot of our focus was on energy finance at that time. But since then, other issues have risen to the fore. Concern about climate change, things like the BP disaster in the Gulf recently, the growth of renewable energy. These are all the sorts of environmental changes or forces that have driven student interest in energy regulation and energy policy. But I don't want to give the impression that we are just reacting to sort of the world's events or what's the latest sort of news story. I think student interest in energy is really driven by our historic connection with the oil and gas industry, and also our interest in areas in the energy industry that are growing. And that does include renewables, because renewables has been a growth area. So I always like to start to talk about energy by showing this diagram. This is a diagram of the energy flow within the United States, prepared every year by the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. I don't know how much of this you can read, but on the left-hand side of the diagram are primary sources of energy. And on the far right-hand side of the diagram are uses, end uses, or energy services that we derive from energy. And Lawrence Livermore assembles data and tries to quantify these various flows from the primary source to its end use. So in the case of petroleum, for example, it's used primarily, and it's the bottom line here on your chart, the green one, the big fat dark green line. Is used primarily in transportation services. Coal, on the other hand, which is the gray box, and the black line, is used primarily as electricity and so on. And if you look at these, you can get these off the web, actually. You can go back all the way to 1975 when it was a hand-drawn diagram in pencil with sort of crosshatches to denote the different flows. You can see how our economy, how our use of energy in the economy has changed over time. Student interest, I think, lately has been driven by pretty significant forces that are deeper than just reacting to the latest news story. So, energy security issues, which have risen to the fore, climate change and environmental issues, certainly Environmental standards that apply to emissions of, say, coal combustion have gotten more strict over time. Concern about global warming has risen. And then a concern about energy efficiency as well is, I think, another area of intense interest we see among the students and among other constituents of the McCombs School. If you look at the diagram, you see the light gray portion in the upper right-hand corner there. That's all what the people at Lawrence Livermore call rejected energy, but that's lost energy, energy that isn't put to use, potential energy that isn't put to use. And so energy efficiency is also an area that we see a lot of student projects, a lot of student interest in. Not long ago, McKinsey did a study. It indicated that we could essentially obtain the same services we obtain from energy now using up to 23% less energy, saving money along the way. So these are win-win opportunities that exist that aren't being taken, that we somehow miss or don't capitalize on for one reason or another. So I want to make sure that we give our due to energy efficiency as one of the major drivers of the new interest in energy at McCombs. Okay, so those are sort of the big forces, I think, out there that have been driving a lot of this. I will say that our student, a lot of what we do at McCombs is in the form of, in energy is in the form of student-driven activities. We offer courses, we have our center, we hold seminars that we organize and so on. But students also drive a lot of this. We have new MBA student groups around energy topics. We have a clean tech concentration, which is energy focused. I think we're on the way to getting a clean energy marketing group as well. We have a business, industry, and government group that's new, many of whom are interested in energy issues. And so a lot of the activities at the school and case competitions and things like that are student-driven as well. Here's another picture that can give us a sense of energy use around the world on a per capita basis. If we were to show a picture of energy use by country on a per unit of GDP basis, it would look different, but this is a per capita picture. You can see that the United States uses more energy per capita than most other countries, not all, but most other countries, which is part of the push for greater energy efficiency. It's also a push, part of the fact that we use a lot of energy and the kind of energy we use. If you remember from the prior diagram, you see the coal line is big and the petroleum line is big, fossil fuels are big. The fact that we use a lot of energy from those sources has given rise to regulatory change that is trying to push our use away from those dirtier sources. And so we're seeing that regulatory change can push growth in other industries. And students are interested in those industries because they see that growth, that growth potential. For example, many of you, if those of you who are involved in energy issues know that, for example, ozone standards are getting stricter, regulatory standards for governing ozone, the precursors of which are nitrogen oxides and other pollutants that come from fossil fuel combustion. Particulate matter that define dust in the air that we breathe, those standards are getting stricter as well. And if you've been reading the papers, you know that there is a federal regulatory push to regulate greenhouse gas emissions as well. Not just a federal push, but some states are regulating these emissions as well. So that leads our students to think, well, what's going to replace those sources of energy? Coal is a reliable, domestically produced source of energy. If we use coal to generate electricity, when you flip the switch, the lights will come on. So what's going to replace that? Students have seen what's coming down the pike, and they've expressed interest in more work on wind, solar, efficiency, demand-side management. So that's a term meaning, managing our demand so that we don't have to build new power plants, new energy sources. We're seeing a lot of that sort of thing. One of our MBA student groups just won a national case competition in competition with all of the best business schools in the country that was focused on energy issues. They were the national champions, and our tower was lit in their honor, just like it's lit for the football team when they win the national championship. We're extremely proud of them for that. So this is a group of, this is from our clean tech group. These students were coming from our clean energy group, and they were, so they're very active. We have a very bright and active and creative student group in that regard. We're also doing a lot more in the way of executive education in the field of energy. Many energy companies are coming back to us. Britt Friend will talk more about this, but many energy companies are coming back to us and asking for additional education, additional training on things like project management, corporate social responsibility in the energy industry. Many of the oil and gas companies do business in places that have very different cultures, very different legal systems, very different political systems, and they're looking for help on how to navigate that difficult terrain. We're seeing an explosion of interest in that sort of thing. Two of the largest investor-owned companies in the world, two of the largest national oil companies in the world come to us now on a regular basis for that kind of training. So we're very proud of that as well. Here's another figure I like to show when I'm talking about energy. This is imports and exports of, in this case, it's oil. If you're ever looking for good data on sort of macro level data on the sort of big energy picture, the BP statistical review that's published every year, notwithstanding their rig management issues, the BP does a great public service by essentially assembling this sort of data and publishing it each year. And it gives you a good sense of where our energy is coming from. In this diagram, if you look at the arrows going into the United States and look for the biggest numbers associated with those arrows, you can see where our primary oil imports come from. We're still one of the biggest oil producers in the world. We still produce a lot of our own oil, but we import a lot of it from Canada, from the Middle East, from Venezuela, and a few other places that are sort of major sources of our oil. We send students to work at oil and gas companies. We always have, and we continue to send students to work at oil and gas companies. And I'm very gratified to hear back from them on a regular basis saying, Professor Spence, I remember I took your energy regulation class, and now I'm here in Alaska or in Saudi Arabia or wherever, and I'm working on issues that we talked about in class. And that's always a great feeling for me as a teacher. I really appreciate that. And I'm proud of the students we send out. They're doing very well. Sometimes we have them come back to our classes. I met a former student here during the break when you all took a break before my talk, was in the audience. So that's a very good feeling. Another one of the issues that's driving student interest in energy right now is the explosion in production of shale gas in the United States. As you probably all know, natural gas historically has been a commodity that's had a very volatile market price in the United States. We've, over the course of my lifetime, periodically worried about having enough of it. At one time, we thought we were going to have to import a lot of liquefied natural gas to serve our gas needs. But the development of the kinds of techniques that our previous speaker was talking about, horizontal drilling techniques, and also hydraulic fracturing techniques, have opened up a lot of domestic gas, a huge potential source of domestic natural gas. And our students are aware of this and interested in it. And we've had last year a conference on this topic. We brought in people from industry to talk, and we involved students in that process to talk about shale gas development. It is a somewhat controversial topic in some places. Not so much here in Texas in the Barnett Shale or in Louisiana in the Haynesville Shale, but up in the Northeast in the Marcellus Shale and in some other parts of the country, it's extremely controversial. If we were to talk about shale gas in a gathering like this in New York State, for example, the strong majority of the audience would be opposed to it right now. They would be dead set against hydraulic fracturing and drilling for gas in the Marcellus Shale in New York State. So it's a very interesting market, a very interesting field to be a part of right now. It's relatively young. A lot of our students are doing both work in school and internships that are involved with shale gas and shale gas development. They know it's a growth industry. It's a growth industry who, like the others we've talked about, may be influenced or changed by regulatory developments because of this fear. The fears are basically related to a couple of things. Number one, with hydraulic fracturing, the company injects a large amount of water, mainly water with some other constituents and sand and some chemicals in it, into the ground to essentially explode the shale, to open up the pockets pockets that allow the gas to escape, and they produce gas from the well that way. The companies that develop these fracturing fluids treat them as proprietary information for the most part, because they are. They develop these special mixtures that do the best possible job of opening up the spaces in the rock to allow the gas to be produced, therefore allowing the well to produce gas for a long period of time. If they feel they have a really good mixture, they don't want the world to know about it. They want to retain the benefits of their research. That scares people. Injecting fluids into the ground, some of which, even in minute amounts, might be suspected carcinogens, scares people. Now, we're talking about injecting 7,000 feet below the surface, well below water tables, but the wells pass through the water table. If the well isn't drilled properly or sealed properly, it theoretically could get into the groundwater. And so these are big issues. Right now, they don't have to disclose that information. They're not required to. There's also an exemption from the Safe Drinking Water Act that fracturing operations benefit from. So that may be lifted. So all of these sort of elements of regulatory change can change the market. And that's the kind of thing we talk about in my class with students who are interested in getting into these fields. By the way, if you want to interject or have questions, I meant to say that at the beginning. You're welcome to interrupt me at any point, or we can save questions for the end. Here's another picture I like to show, that is another sort of macro level picture about the energy industry. This is a picture of all the power plants in the United States. It's a little bit dated, but this picture doesn't change that frequently. The dots represent different kinds of power generation, and the size of the dots represents the capacity of the electric generating plant. You can get a sense of the kinds of issues that we talk about in my class from a picture like this, because it shows you where, for example, the coal-fired power plants are, the big ones. And these are the sources of some of these pollutants we were talking about earlier: nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, carbon dioxide. And you can, for some of these pollutants, where they're coming from matters, because they are emitted from the smokestack, they go up into the air, and then they come back down, somewhere downwind of the smokestack. And so a lot of the regional politics of energy are illuminated by a picture like this. If you're living in the Northeast and you see all those big coal-fired power plants to your, or let's say upwind of you, that influences how you think about these issues and how you lobby your congressman and your general point of view. It also gives us a picture of how different states use different types of energy. If you're in California and there's going to be legislation passed that drastically impacts the coal industry, you probably don't care that much. You don't have many coal-fired power plants. You don't produce a lot of coal anymore. You used to, but you don't anymore. And so that's why we might see in California, as we do, really aggressive legislation aimed at reducing greenhouse gases. They're not going to harm a domestic coal mining industry in California by passing that sort of legislation. Whereas in West Virginia, they will, of course. Okay. This also gives us, this also leads me to another issue about which students are interested, and I want to mention, and that is the potential resurgence of nuclear power. I'm seeing an increased interest in this among students. When I said earlier, we asked the question, where's our electricity going to come from if it's not going to come from coal in the future? And if it's going to come from a source that we want to be there when we flip the light switch, perhaps one answer, in addition to natural gas, is nuclear power. Maybe you remember, many of you like I do, how and why nuclear power lost its popularity. When I was a kid, we thought all our power at this point in my life would be coming from nuclear. There was a little guy that used to appear in the ads on TV named Ready Kilowatt. Does anybody remember Ready Kilowatt? Yeah. He was a cute little cartoon character that was the electric industry's advertising icon. And we thought that nuclear power was going to be the power source of the future. It was going to be so inexpensive, it was said to be too cheap to meter, meaning too cheap to measure to charge you for it. You just pay some sort of flat fee. Obviously, after 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, all of that changed. Nuclear power became much more expensive to build. Now, with increasing attention to greenhouse gases and climate change issues, Many people think that there may be a resurgence in construction of nuclear power plants. And so we're seeing student interest in that. There is, in fact, for the first time in a very long time, a line of applicants at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission seeking licenses to build new plants. And so this may be, not in the immediate future, because it's going to be a while before those license applications are processed, but in the medium-term future, perhaps a growth industry in energy. And so we're seeing students coming to us asking for more material on that, more coursework on that, and some of them are actually interviewing for jobs right now with nuclear companies. So that's another exciting or interesting development, exciting or interesting depending on your point of view, I guess.
Hey,
yeah.
Do we have any nuclear engineers?
Among our MBA students?
No. I mean, have we trained nuclear engineers since it's been a dead industry?
Oh, you're making you're raising a good point. The population of nuclear engineers is graying, and there's a serious concern among proponents of nuclear power that we're not going to have enough of them in the near future. The schools that have the ability to train nuclear engineers are starting just now to address that concern. So we're starting to get more graduates and more enrollees in those sorts of programs. But imagine you're the student thinking of getting enrolled in a program like this. We still don't have any of those applications approved yet. We don't know for sure that we're going to be able to build these plants. There's a lot of people who are excited about it, but we're not there yet. We're not certain yet that that's going to happen. Now, that's not to say there isn't growth in the industry elsewhere. Asia, South America, they are building new plants, lots of new plants. And so if you can be trained as a nuclear engineer if you're willing to move there and work as well.
Maybe one of the problems with financing of the plant.
Yes. Traditionally, as many of you may know, we've had a liability. The federal government is covered essentially upside liability through the Price-Anderson Act, and that basically above a certain amount, catastrophic liability. We, the taxpayer, have covered that insurance, and several recent energy bills at the federal level have tried to strengthen that guarantee and to provide even an additional incentive, mitigating liability risk for the first, I think it is 5 or 6 plants that are licensed. So there's a big rush to be among those first 5 or 6. And yes, that has been an impediment to development. That's right. Yes, sir.
Does nuclear have any future at all as a transportation fuel, or is it strictly just as power?
There may be others in the room who know better than I, but I've heard nothing about it as a transportation fuel for, personal vehicles, trucks, cars.
I think the Navy uses some power submarines.
Right. And that's a bigger power plant than you put in your car or truck. Yeah. I'm not aware of anything like that, but yes, sir. You know?
And some would say that you're going to have electric cars, nuclear is the only reasonable way to power them, or you're just putting more hydrocarbon out to power the legislature. I've got a question on the map. With very minimal regulation, other than the market, what would this map look like in terms of the mix of nuclear and coal and oil and that type of thing? And also, could you explain a carbon credit, and is that a bogus concept, or is there some real value to that?
Let me take the last one first, and if you get the other one, raise your hand and I will. So one of the concepts you see now when we're talking about regulating greenhouse gases is a cap and trade system. You've heard this term, cap and trade. This would be essentially, instead of telling every coal-fired power plant you have to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions by this much, and that's the end of the story. That's sort of the traditional permitting system. That's how we've done it. We would issue tradable or auction tradable permits to emitters of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. They could then buy and sell those permits between them. The advantage from an economist's point of view of this approach is that the emitters, the polluters, who can reduce their pollution levels most inexpensively or cheaply will do the lion's share of the reduction in that case. They'll over-reduce their pollution, sell their excess credits to others who will then won't have to reduce their pollution as much. And if we have a market for those things, the idea is that we will achieve a reduction at a much lower level of cost. This is what we did. I'm sorry?
carbon dioxide as a pollutant?
So if carbon dioxide was regulated, that's one way we could regulate carbon dioxide. And so in Congress, there have been several bills proposing that. One was passed by the House of Representatives in 2009, but not by the Senate. This is what Europe does to regulate greenhouse gases. This is what we do to regulate sulfur dioxide emissions among large power plants, and we have since the mid-1990s. And by most analyses, it is a cheaper way to reduce than what we call command and control regulation, which is just forcing individual plants to reduce by some amount we specify. Some people are worried about cap and trade on a number of grounds. Number one, it doesn't give companies much certainty about the price of reducing emissions, because the price of the permits can vary by the forces of supply and demand will move the price up and down. A carbon tax, for example, would give them certainty. They would know how much it costs to pollute. A marketable permit system, if you need a certain number of permits, and that price is fluctuating all the time, it's really hard to plan. The other worry that people have in the wake of the financial crisis is that speculators might get involved in the carbon market and drive prices up and down in ways that people don't like. So that's one of the criticisms. That's the other criticism you see leveled against that approach.
Would it be all yellow if there was minimal regulation?
No, I think the prior question sort of indicates that there's a market impediment to more nuclear development. It's not all just safety regulation by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, although those requirements did get much stricter after 3 Mile Island. And the NRC, like any organization interested in self-preservation, is working very hard to try and help the licensing process get smoother and quicker. So I don't think we can push sort of regulatory impediments as the main reason why there's not a more yellow on the map. What you would see without any regulation whatsoever is probably more coal, because it's still cheap. It's not as cheap as it used to be, but it's still relatively cheap. Perhaps more gas, but a lot less of the green renewable. So you see in this map, hydro is separate from the rest of the renewables. Hydros can be very economical in lots of places, but the other renewables probably would be less prominent.
The chairman or CEO of Exxon said last week in Fort Worth that in, I don't remember, 20 or 30 years, said gas would replace coal as the largest supplier of electric generation.
Gas is the fastest growing component of electric generation. If we assume that if we assume there's two things that could hurt coal. One is regulatory costs. So if we do impose greenhouse gas regulation on coal, it makes a big difference. It doesn't make all coal uncompetitive, but a lot of existing plants would become uncompetitive. I think the Energy Information Administration did a study. This is a little bit dated now, but at the time, around the time of the Kyoto Protocol, they estimated that 1/3 of coal plants would have to close. And we have something like 2,000 utility, commercial electric coal plants. So that would be a big change, and it would increase electricity prices by something like 2 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a pretty significant jump. That's one pressure on coal. The other is, I think, coal commodity prices as demand from the rest of the world. It's becoming a world market, and as demand from the rest of the world is increasing, coal prices are going up for the first time in a long time. You may have been reading about the dispute between Montana coal companies and Washington or Oregon, I forget which it is, residents who don't want to allow the construction of a coal export terminal for export of coal from Montana to Asia. Those market pressures could also hurt coal, and in that case, natural gas is a likely substitute because a natural gas plant will be there when you flip the switch, right? I mean, as long as you have the gas and you're generating, and we have a lot of cheap gas now, or at least we think we have potentially a lot of cheap gas. That might very well be true. And it's a lot cleaner than coal. And it's a lot cleaner than oil. So if you look, I didn't bring my slides showing you the emissions comparisons, but it's a little over half as much, about half as much greenhouse gas emissions, but fractional amounts of the other major pollutants come from natural gas. Yes?
If the water table is high and the gas shell area is low, how significant is the risk of pulling it up through the water table within a well? Couldn't the well protect that?
So the risk is very, very tiny based on the experience we've had so far, but it's greater than 0. And we're talking about a very large N, as we say in social science. We're drilling a lot of these wells. There was a situation in Pennsylvania, an accident in Pennsylvania that looks like it may have involved leakage from a well into a water table. This is if you've seen trailers for this movie called Gasland, which is about a documentary that's in opposition to shale gas production. They show, the popular part of the trailer shows somebody lighting water out of their faucet on fire because of methane in the water. And it looks like possibly in this instance, that was the integrity of the well hole was not good, and so methane coming back up the well got into the water table. That's one, some people think that's the most likely explanation. But we're talking about something like 1 million fracturing operations in many thousands, tens of thousands of wells. I don't know, maybe some of you may know better than I, maybe hundreds of thousands at this point, I don't know. And very little in the way of that kind of problem, but it's not 0. So if it's your backyard and it's your water table, there's very little incentive. Well, there's some incentive not to protest, because if you're in the Northeast, you also have the most expensive gas in the country. But chances are you'd rather they go produce that gas elsewhere. Yes, sir.
Can you comment on how the map looks on developing countries, on countries that are growing fast?
You mean this map?
Yes.
Well, it varies all over the map, as it were. In countries that have had a strong domestic coal industry, they tend to use a lot of coal historically. So Poland and Germany still use a lot of coal. Germany less, because they've got such tremendous greenhouse gas reduction obligations under European law. But in places, so people tend to use what's there and what's available. In South America, there's a lot of big hydro projects, or a lot of hydro used. There are some countries, in Norway, for example, is not a developing country. They're tremendously reliant on hydro, something like 75%. France, 75% or more nuclear. So it varies all over the place. There's a lot of variation.
And India.
China has a tremendous amount of coal. I don't know the percentages, but historically coal has been the biggest for them. They're trying to close down a lot of old mines, and they're building huge hydro projects. You may have heard of the Three Gorges project, the biggest hydroelectric project in the world. They're trying to build more of those. They're building nuclear. Their energy needs are so huge, and they expect to be such a voracious consumer of energy. They're building everything right now. They're also a leader in renewables. They're doing a lot of work in renewables as well. Okay, let me just show you a picture of how we do things here in terms of energy, organizational picture at the McCombs School. So we have our Energy Management and Innovation Center, which is a McCombs school-wide center. A lot of centers are located within a department. Ours is school-wide, so we're trying to promote cross-departmental work on energy. That's our goal, both a collaboration between faculty and student activities, student work. So for example, I'm commenting right now on a survey, an energy survey that our marketing department is putting together that we hope will become a nationally known survey. That's part of the research that they're doing, producing this survey on energy attitudes toward energy issues and a variety of other things. At the student level, we have a lot of cross-departmental sort of student team activities. I've described some of those to you already. I'd say the departments that have been most active so far have been the finance, marketing, and as it was called, the BUGS department, business, government, and society, which is a new department at McCombs, about which I'm going to say a little bit more at the end of my talk, because I wanted to give that as sort of an add-on here. I think, so to give you a flavor of the kinds of things I do as a legal scholar, so we heard a little bit about derivatives earlier. Our colleague Robert Prentice, who's a securities law expert, and I'm an energy person, we just wrote a paper on the regulation of energy markets, both physical and derivatives markets, which has changed. And many of you may know it's changed quite a bit in the last few years. There are new statutes and rules that have been passed, and we're sort of looking at those rules and seeing how we think they might work or not, as the case may be. That's one sort of piece of research that I'm involved in. I'm also involved in the environmental regulatory side of energy, and so I've got a paper out on the sort of the politics. You may have gotten the sense from my talk that I'm interested in the politics of energy regulation. And so that's the kind of thing I do. We have other people working in a very focused and narrow way on energy finance issues. We have people working on energy marketing issues. We have a new course that's sort of an environmental / energy marketing course for MBAs. And the faculty member who runs that course does research in that area. So we're trying to be holistic and not allow our sort of disciplinary and departmental silos to keep us from understanding the big picture, because that often happens in academia. It's really hard for people to collaborate across those boundaries. We're trying to facilitate that sort of collaboration. The center is also coordinating its efforts with the university-wide energy efforts. We have an energy institute at the university level that oversees all of the college's energy efforts. And so we've participated in campus-wide energy seminars, conferences, and that sort of thing. I'm part of a group now that's organizing a conference in April that will bring energy professionals and energy academics from all around the country together here in Austin to talk about impediments to the development of the smart grid. You know, the essentially smarter meters, smarter architecture, electronic architecture in the electric grid that we hope will help us do a lot better job of managing the production, delivery, and use of electricity. And I'm doing that with the law school and representatives of the engineering school. So we're trying to not just collaborate across departments within McCombs, but also across the wider university community. We also have a very eminent board of advisors at the Energy Management and Information Center. We get together with them on a biannual basis, twice a year, whatever that is, twice a year. We get together with them and get their advice, look for ways to have our students collaborate with people in the private sector. They can come to campus and meet with our students. We're having representatives of ExxonMobil and the BG Group, formerly British Gas, in this month to give talks and meet with our students at receptions, chances to network and talk. We're doing that sort of thing. So we're excited about all the things that are going on. We think we're on the right path. You may hear, since you're here, you're probably on a mailing list that might one day receive ads for conferences that come out of the center that are the sort of thing that I'm talking about here. So we urge you to participate in those if you're so inclined. I was also asked to take a little time to talk about our new department, the Business, Government, and Society Department. But before I do that, I talked about a lot of things in relation to energy. Is there anything else, any follow-up questions or comments that anybody would like to ask? Yes?
I have a question. With all the gas shale finds that you showed us on the map, do you think that the production of LNG terminals receiving and exporting will be built in the United States? And do you think that the United States will ever be an exporter of energy to other countries?
Well, I think we certainly could be when it comes to gas if we produce all the shale gas. I've talked. So if you're aware of the history of LNG development or prospective development in the United States, you know that there's been many proposals for construction of LNG import terminals. We're talking about liquefied natural gas now, and at one point the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission published a map that showed all the proposed terminals, and there was the map. The coast was littered with dots. But only a few of the dots were colored in. Those are the ones that actually were being built. And I think we have 5 or 6 of these terminals now in the country. There have been some terminals in the Northeast that have gotten permitted near Boston and a few others. I don't know if they're going to be built or not. I think the development of shale gas has put a damper on that. I've heard people talk about LNG export terminals, but I don't know that we're producing enough gas to make that sensible at this point yet. If you look at the map of the shale gas plays, there weren't too many way out west. A lot of the big importers of LNG are in Asia. And so if we could get LNG export terminals on the West Coast, that might make more sense.
The Freeport LNG, which is being built now, is going to be an exporting terminal.
Really?
Yeah. But I didn't read it. I just heard that. So I don't know.
So for a while when we were trying to build import terminals, we were having trouble financing them. And at one point, the government had to make a change in policy that essentially allowed these terminals to sign long-term contracts with a single company. Originally, they were supposed to be open access to anybody who wanted to use them. But in order to get it financed, you had to sign a long-term contract around which to build. The revenue would allow you to build a financing plan around it. There was, yes, sir.
What about regulations around drilling offshore and how it might impact senior management of these companies, like the Sarbanes-Oxley sign off?
Yeah. I had one of the people who was testifying before the commission after the BP spill called me and asked me about that exact issue. Could we do a Sarbanes-Oxley kind of a thing? So for those of you that don't know, you all, I'm sure, know that there's a moratorium, or the government has essentially stopped leasing of offshore oil developments after the BP disaster. The Obama administration was actually about to lift a moratorium on offshore drilling that had been in place for a very long time before the accident in the Gulf. After the accident in the Gulf, they changed their mind and decided to keep the moratorium in place. They're now studying ways to change the regulations to try and minimize further the probability of an event like the Gulf spill. And one of the things they're looking at is having someone in the company essentially be individually responsible for safety through a sort of a sign-off mechanism. There'd be safety reports that the CEO or some very high-ranking officer would have to sign and would be personally liable for that, ensuring that that's true. In the case of Sarbanes-Oxley, the bill passed after the financial meltdown of 2001. Thank you. That was a device used on financial reports. CEO or CFO, this is not my field, both have to sign the reports, and if the reports turn out to be fraudulent, if they're wrong, then that person can be banned from working for a publicly traded company and can be liable for the harm caused by the fraud. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I know that's actively being considered. Obviously, it would put a lot of risk on the shoulders of the people signing those bills. If you've read about the Macondo well and the blow-by-blow sort of accounts of what happened, there have been several published, one in the New Orleans paper, one in the New York Times. You know that it was a situation of diffused responsibility, or at least a sense of diffused responsibility. That's part of why people are looking at that sort of solution. Really chaotic, very high stakes decisions that have to be made like that. So yeah, that could happen. I don't know if it will or won't. Any other energy questions before I wanted to tell you, yes?
It seems like we had 3 Mile Island, and now there's no nuclear. We've got BP now. Now there'll be no more drilling in the Gulf. All the rigs have left. There's certainly going to be a shale incident. That's going to happen. So there'll be no more shale. It will happen. I mean, there is 0%, and you do enough of it, it's going to. So are we essentially just foisting this energy production on the rest of the world? We're going to let the disasters happen over there and buy it from them, regardless of the political climate and everything else, because it's not going to happen through wind, and I mean, some will, but not nearly enough to.
So I agree that we overreact to individual incidents, especially in the political process or the legislative process. Yeah, and so I think you're right that we do forego opportunities because we're not looking at the risk in a balanced way. I don't think they last forever, however. So I think that you can find now environmental groups who are pro-nuclear.
It's a long time. Wait till a dam gets way in the
northwest. So. So you can find pro-nuclear environmental groups, which in the 1970s, if you remember perhaps the China Syndrome and these movies, then you could not find a single environmentalist who would tell you that they were pro-nuclear back then.
The key is just to find out how to make money on whatever side of the deal that you can, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to consult the finance people about that. I'm interested in sort of the overall energy policy issue, and I think you raise a good point, which is that we sometimes overreact to low probability but above zero probability risks. Now, in the case of a nuclear accident, if we had had a Chernobyl type of accident, which we didn't, and we won't because we have different kinds of plants, and we have actually quite an exemplary safety record in our nuclear plants. I mean, they've been there for, yeah. Matt?
How much are we, I guess I'm a little more familiar with kind of engineering side at the university, had a pretty good petroleum engineering for a long time, long out. How much are we, how well positioned is the business school and maybe even the law school to use our previous foundation to take advantage of this growing interest and growing demand? I mean,
In nuclear?
Yeah, no, in energy.
Oh, I think we're in a pretty good position. So we have, we're doing a lot of collaboration. The law school has a new energy center as well. We have the Cockrell School of Engineering. So I'm working on a regular basis with people in the electrical engineering department, mechanical engineering. We have a guy who teaches a lot of our clean tech students named Michael Weber, who's a real star in sort of clean tech engineering and policy. I deal with people in petroleum engineering. We're obviously very strong in that field. So I think we're doing a pretty good job of partnering with them and collaborating with them and exposing our students to those opportunities as well. We have a new course now, sort of a capstone course. It's sort of not for everybody because only 4 business students are allowed into it, 4 law students and 4 engineering students. They work together as teams over the course of a semester on a problem. So it's sort of, you have to compete to get into that class, but it's a more institutionalized form of that kind of collaboration. So I feel pretty good about that. I'm sure we can keep exploring ways to do better. In terms of national ranking, I'm not sure there are rankings of this right now, but I bet you'd have a hard time finding somebody, a university that is better positioned. I think that's why we get a lot of this exec ed business. It's all competitive. So we beat out Kellogg and Chicago or Northwestern for one of these big oil companies. We're beating out other big schools for these exec ed programs. So, yes.
You mentioned you love the political side. So last week they reported in the Financial Times that British Petroleum is going back and trying to renegotiate maybe the damages and so forth to kind of benefit shareholders. Do you think that has any, I mean, how long does that process take? Is there any precedence to, you know, is that just a long dialogue or really has some merit?
So the only precedent I'm aware of is the Exxon Valdez spill. So in terms of that magnitude, and that took a very long time. It worked its way. Now the 2 different companies, Exxon, much more likely to fight. They have a reputation of being more likely to fight in court than BP. BP sort of took a very accommodationist position after the spill, promised to devote X dollars to the problem and so on. But there will be a long negotiation. A lot of the problem is that the science, as I understand it, is very uncertain. So every day you see new information about whether or where the oil is or isn't. We didn't get nearly the kinds of coastline damage that we expected. Not as many of those pictures that you saw with Exxon Valdez. But now apparently they've discovered a bunch of the oil at the bottom of the ocean, just sitting there having adverse effects on the ecosystem on the ocean floor. So there will be natural resources damages that will be paid by BP, and a lot of the time will be taken just trying to calculate them. Even if we agreed on all what actually happened, then we have to fight over how much it's worth, how you value it, and that's
overreaction. I mean, you think that that's just more of a dialogue that'll go on for years and years and years and probably no.
Yes, along with some payouts to people who are injured. So there's already payments being made to people who were injured by the spill, but there will be a lot of it will string out for a very long time. Yeah. Can I just say a word briefly? I'm out of time, but I just wanted to say a word about our new department. This is a brand new department as of last September. We decided that these issues of business-government relations, we've always had a law group, like Wharton and Michigan and Indiana, a few other business schools. We've always had a law group within the business school. And we've always thought that students ought to understand the legal environment in which business operates. But we've seen an upsurge, quite a strong upsurge in interest in sort of the political environment and sort of the social, ethical environment as well of business. A lot of it has to do with the global economy. People are now going to do business in cultures and political systems and legal systems with which they're unfamiliar. And so we have created a new department that is aimed at looking at these issues in an integrated way. So we're trying to add more social scientists and also some ethics scholars, mainly from the behavioral psychology side. That's what we'd like to do. That's our goal. So we have a long-term goal of building up the non-legal side of our group to provide our students with a fuller educational experience and give them the tools they need to navigate these sort of difficult legal, political, cultural, social environment in which they do business. I have a few more slides on this, and they're in your slide pack, but I don't have time to talk about them because I promised to finish at 1:15. If anybody wants to talk about this issue separately, I'd be happy to talk to you either here or by email or any other way you'd like to. Well, almost any other way you'd like to. All right, thanks for your attention. I appreciate it. Hope you have a good rest of the day.